not necessarily reflect the views and opinions of 8 News Now or Nexstar Media Group.
Everybody gets it, everybody understands it. It's now figuring out how to untangle the complexity and make it work for victims.
Tonight on Politics Now, a big change to domestic violence laws in the state could make it harder to keep guns out of the hands of abusers. The CEO of Safe Nest explains it and where we should go from here. Plus,
hopefully I've given other people the courage to stand up for what's right.
Dealing with workplace discrimination, the I-Team's Vanessa Murphy tells you about the state agency that handles those complaints and how often it's being reported. Plus, we dig through the campaign finance reports and congressional races to tell you which challengers raise the most money in Nevada.
From 8 News Now, this is Politics Now with Steve Sebelius.
3 cities in the Valley will not require people convicted of misdemeanor domestic violence to give up their guns. Welcome to Politics Now. I'm Steve Sebelius. The Las Vegas City Council approved a new ordinance by a 6-to-1 vote this week, and North Las Vegas approved its version 3-to-1. Henderson's new law passed unanimously. The law has come after the Nevada Supreme Court ruled that if losing your gun rights is a possible penalty of conviction, a person must be afforded a jury trial. But local governments say they don't have the resources or even the legal authorization to do it. To learn more about this issue and possible fixes, I interviewed Safe Nest CEO Liz Orton Berger. When you saw this ruling, it must have immediately occurred to you, oh my goodness, we have a very big problem here.
Right. So we had actually worked with different politicians during the session to quash a legislative bill that did just this because we understand the impact. And the impact is disproportionately felt in Clark County. There are about 15,000 domestic violence misdemeanor cases statewide. 88% of those are in Clark County. Half of that are in our municipal courts between North Las Vegas, and Henderson. So you can't understate the amount of impact and the amount of cases this affects. So as soon as we heard it first through our advocates at the DA's office. We started to read it. We, of course, engaged with our attorneys and lobby firm to understand exactly what was happening. And then we started calling folks and trying to figure out what is going to happen for victims, because at any given time we're working with anywhere from 5,000 to 8,000 victims of domestic violence, a portion of who are navigating the court system. So we have to be up to speed in helping them understand their cases.
Immediately adopted an interim approach, which was to charge people who were accused of domestic violence with simple battery. And that does not sit well with your group, because simple battery does not only does it not take guns away, but it doesn't contain some of the other provisions that a domestic violence conviction would carry: counseling, fines, just keeping statistics of how many cases that we have so that we know what we're dealing with. Those things went away, so I imagine that was obviously not something you were prepared to live with.
Right, yes, so the simple battery had 3 major flaws with it. The guns is one, the counseling portion is the other, and then it doesn't escalate. So if you have 3 simple batteries within 7 years, there's no escalation to felony, whereas domestic violence misdemeanor, there's an escalation to felony. And you're exactly right, the stats are skewed, and the amount of cases that we're dealing with that then go to simple battery is catastrophic for victims' rights groups, but more importantly, it's catastrophic for victims, because we're not able to do the things that we know put them at the most risk for homicide when we're not charging that crime.
Their hands are tied, or so they say. What would you do if you were the city attorney? How would you approach it?
And we've been working with the city attorney to sort of make sure that the victim standpoint is front and center, and he's been very amenable, and I think he and I stand in the same position, which is this is a decision that the city had to make, but if it's a stopping point, that is failure. This has to be the starting point for us as a state and as a county and as a city to take domestic violence seriously. The numbers we have here are, when I talk to people about 13,000 cases in Clark County for domestic violence misdemeanor, people are shocked. And we weren't taking this seriously before the Supreme Court decision. Now it is time to look to see what other states are doing. For decades there have been domestic violence specialty courts in other places. This is time for us to figure out a solution moving forward. This needs to only be a stopgap ballot measure. No city council person went into the last 2 days in any municipality saying, oh, fantastic, victims are less safe. People, everybody gets it, everybody understands it. It's now figuring out how to untangle the complexity and make it work for victims. So I think we have a lot of advocates in the space. We just now have to figure it out, and we're going to need the political will and the resources to make a real solution happen.
It's possible the new ordinances will be challenged in court, and most observers expect that this issue will ultimately wind up before the legislature, either in the 2021 session or in a special session called to deal with the problem before that. Well, many of you responded to the I-Team report about a tennis pro who says she and her biracial daughters were discriminated against at the Red Rock Country Club. The mother is suing the country club after a state agency backed up her claims. The I-Team's Vanessa Murphy looked into how complaints are handled and how viewers can turn to the process if they need to.
Since our exclusive interview with Carmel Mary Hill and her daughters aired, we've learned there's been an increase in complaints filed. More people are turning to this state to say they've been discriminated against too.
Hopefully I've given other people the courage to stand up for what's right.
Carmel Mary Hill says she was told her biracial daughters could no longer use the daycare at Red Rock Country Club, where she worked as a tennis instructor. She complained to the Nevada Equal Rights Commission, or NERC, and was fired shortly after. This year, NERC issued a probable cause finding of discrimination and retaliation.
The commission accepts, attempts to settle, and investigates alleged unlawful discrimination complaints in employment and housing and public accommodations. That's basically their role.
NERC handles complaints of discrimination related to race, religion, gender, and more. It operates under the Department of Employment, Training, and Rehabilitation. Spokeswoman Rosa Mendez tells the I-Team from July 2018 to July 2019, NERC received more than 1,500 complaints of discrimination. Nearly 800 were founded.
We certainly don't want to see discrimination in the state.
As a result of the finding in Mary Hill's case, Red Rock Country Club is required to provide discrimination training to employees and incorporate Equal Employment Opportunity Commission guidance on workplace policies. NERC also provided a right to sue letter to Mary Hill. She says since a settlement was not reached, she is suing in federal court for financial compensation.
It's not just about the money. It's about making a change. She's taken a bold step to perfect her rights, and we're going to go to bat for her to make sure that what happened to her does not happen to anyone else.
I want to make a difference. I think there's so many racial problems in America right now, and I feel like me standing up makes people think twice now.
We have more information about the Nevada Equal Rights Commission on our website, 8newsnow.com. Vanessa Murphy, 8 News Now.
Well, the Nevada Gaming Control Board is looking to ban Steve Wynn from the state's casino industry. The board has filed a 23-page complaint against the former CEO of Wynn Resorts, calling him unsuitable to hold a state gaming license. The report says Wynn has, quote, repeatedly violated Nevada's gaming statutes and regulations, bringing discredit upon the state of Nevada and its gaming industry, unquote. It references the numerous sexual assault allegations against Wynn that drove him out of the industry. The Gaming Commission also fined Wynn Resorts a record $20 million for ignoring the complaints. The board's next meeting is scheduled for October 24th. You can take a look at the full complaint. That's on our website at 8newsnow.com. Well, coming next, flooding the airwaves with impeachment talk.
$2.3 million of that is directly from the RNC.
We will look at the millions of dollars being spent in favor of and against impeachment inquiries, plus moving for sanctions against Turkey, the bipartisan condemnation of Donald Trump's troop withdrawal in Syria.
only on 8 News Now. Welcome back to Politics Now.
Democrats and Republicans have already spent millions on advertisements to make their cases for and against impeachment. That's from a report by Advertising Analytics, a company that tracks political ad spending. It says that in the 2 weeks following Speaker Nancy Pelosi's announcement of the impeachment inquiry, the Republican National Committee and the Trump campaign spent $6 million on ads attacking Democrats and the impeachment process. Washington, D.C. Bureau correspondent Morgan Wright tells us how Democrats are spending millions themselves.
In the weeks after Speaker Nancy Pelosi's announcement of an impeachment inquiry, some serious cash has been spent on political advertising.
Since this baseless impeachment crusade against President Trump, we've put $10 million directly into counterattacks against this movement.
Liz Harrington is with the Republican National Committee.
$2.3 million of that is directly from the RNC.
The RNC and President Trump's 2020 campaign spent the money on ads like this, designed to use the Democratic impeachment inquiry to rally the president's supporters.
Democrats are failing voters.
The RNC says this is its first ad buy in 8 years. And while they're spending money, they're making more.
We've raised over $15 million just in the first 48 hours, along with the Trump campaign.
But Democrats and their progressive allies say other than raising money, the ads will provide little political benefit for Republicans.
If you look at the polling right now, the country is moving towards impeachment, even among Republicans.
Daniela Gibbs-Leger is with the Center for American Progress Action Fund.
I don't think you'll see Democrats turning this into a political process like Republicans are, because to them, it's not about politics. It is about the health of our democracy.
A media watching organization, Advertising Analytics, says the Democrats have also been spending money on ads, more than $1 million focused on the impeachment inquiry and protecting candidates in vulnerable districts. Reporting in Washington, Morgan Wright.
Meanwhile, President Trump has reached a ceasefire deal with Turkey, but lawmakers are on full alert to sanction that country if necessary. Washington, D.C. correspondent Kelly Meyer has more on that from Capitol Hill.
It's really a great day for civilization.
The U.S. and Turkey have a deal. On Thursday, the two countries worked out a ceasefire agreement, an immediate 120-hour military pause while Kurdish forces moved to a safe zone, with a permanent ceasefire to follow. Before this news broke, lawmakers on Capitol Hill were calling for strict sanctions against the country for invading northeastern Syria.
What Turkey did in Syria is unacceptable.
South Carolina Senator Lindsey Graham introduced a bill to apply new sanctions on key Turkish officials, banks, and military transactions. Defense Secretary Esper was on Capitol Hill briefing senators on the 11 days since President Trump announced the withdrawal of U.S. troops from Syria. After the briefing, Senator Richard Blumenthal said he expressed horror at the situation.
Deep disappointment in the abdication of leadership.
Despite news of the ceasefire, Maryland Senator Chris Van Hollen, who introduced the bill with Graham, said he stands ready to move full steam ahead on their call for sanctions.
We're doing what we can to let the world know that we think America does have an important role to play in the world, and that we are not an unreliable partner, and we will not give up in the fight against ISIS.
After the ceasefire was reached, Graham said he spoke with President Trump and said he stands ready to work with the president and Congress to ensure the invasion into Syria ends. Reporting in Washington, I'm Kelly Meyer.
The Syria issue marked a rare moment of Republican disunity. Even staunch Trump allies, such as Senator Graham, who you saw in that piece, and Representative Liz Cheney of Wyoming, had criticized his decision to withdraw U.S. troops from northern Syria because it gave a green light for Turkey's military action. Well, up next, candidates on the attack.
Your signature, Senator, is to have a plan for everything, except this.
How Elizabeth Warren became the focus of other candidates in this week's debate, and how it resulted in way more speaking time for her. Plus, we will break down some of the fundraising in the congressional races, including how well this former Miss Nevada is doing. That's next on Politics. In our On the Trail segment this week, 12 Democratic candidates for president squared off for a 3-hour debate in Ohio this week. All of them are united behind the idea of impeaching President Donald Trump. But Senator Elizabeth Warren emerged as a new target for several others. Warren is now leading in several polls. CBS News' Dana Backus was in Westerville, Ohio, to break it down for us.
University in Ohio.
The Democrats' fourth debate often seemed like 11 against 1.
And sometimes I think that Senator Warren is more focused on being punitive or pitting some part of the country against the other.
Massachusetts Senator Elizabeth Warren, who is surging in the polls, took jabs from all sides, most notably on how she would pay for universal health care.
Your signature, Senator, is to have a plan for everything, except this.
Medicare for all is the gold standard. We can pay for this. I've laid out the basic principles. Costs are going to go up for the wealthy. They're going to go up for big corporations. They will not go up for middle-class families.
While the Democrats worked to highlight their differences, they were on the same page about one thing: impeaching President Trump. This was the first debate since the impeachment inquiry began.
As a former prosecutor, I know a confession when I see it, and he did it in plain sight.
The impeachment inquiry stems from the president's push to have Ukraine investigate former Vice President Joe Biden and his son Hunter. Last night, Biden tried to set the record straight.
My son did nothing wrong. I did nothing wrong.
Democrats also agreed the president's troop withdrawal from Syria was a mistake.
Think about how absurd it is that this president is caging kids on the border and effectively letting ISIS prisoners run free.
And 78-year-old Vermont Senator Bernie Sanders was back after suffering a heart attack 2 weeks ago.
And I just want to thank you from the bottom of my heart. And I'm so happy to be back here with you this evening.
After the debate, Sanders scored endorsements from Congresswomen Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez of New York and Ilhan Omar of Minnesota. Danya Backus, CBS News, Westerville, Ohio.
Well, all those attacks helped Warren end up with the most speaking time. She spoke for more than 23 minutes of the 3-hour event. The runner-up was Biden, who spoke for just less than 17 minutes. Now, the next debate is in November, on November 20th. It will have increased polling and fundraising thresholds for the candidates to qualify. Well, the third quarter fundraising totals are in for the congressional races, so we want to take a look at the two most competitive districts. These numbers are just for the third quarter of this year. First, in Congressional District 4, incumbent Democrat Stephen Horsford raised more than $300,000. In the Republican field, former Miss Nevada and local business owner Lisa Song Sutton has raised nearly $128,000. That includes a personal loan of $20,000. Former congressional aide and Navy reservist Charles Navarro has raised about $80,000, but $75,000 of that was from a personal loan. And former Republican Assemblyman Jim Marchant raised about $58,000. That number's about half of his total in the second quarter, which was the highest among the Republican candidates for the 4th District. Over in Congressional District 3, incumbent Democrat Susie Lee raised nearly $490,000 in the third quarter. Her two main Republican challengers raised large chunks of their money from personal loans. Former State Treasurer Dan Schwartz raised about $264,000, but $187,000 of that was from a personal loan to his campaign. And former professional wrestler Dan Rodimer raised about $250,000, $65,000 of which he loaned to his own campaign. We've interviewed many of the candidates, including all the ones we named in the Congressional District 4. You can find those on our website at 8newsnow.com. Look for the 2020 Election Interviews tab. Well, we all see aggressive driving on valley roadways. Up next, Sheriff Joe Lombardo tells us what to do if you see road rage starting to develop. That's next on Politics.
at Planet Nissan.
You're watching Politics Now.
We all get frustrated in traffic. If you follow me on Twitter, you sure know I do. So what should you do when you see road rage or aggressive driving happening on Valley roads? Our Good Day Las Vegas team of John Langler and Alex Backus, asked Sheriff Joe Lombardo that question this week. Take a look.
Road rage in particular, probably the best way I can say this is avoid it. Quite often people's emotions get in the way, so an individual cuts you off, or they short stop you, or you're just verbally upset because of what's going on in your lives, and you exchange improper gestures, things like that. The best thing to do is be the best witness you can. Identify the type of vehicle, the plate, the registration, numbers off the plate if you can, and stay away from it. Because if you de-escalate, what we try to teach even our police officers, usually have a better result. So avoid it the best you can. Don't engage. If you have the opportunity to call 911, what happens is, yeah, you're traveling on the freeway. We may not be around in the vicinity. We wouldn't have the opportunity to engage this individual, but we record that information, so that plate is identified as an individual that was involved in the incident. So if we encounter them later or observe them later, we have the ability to address the issue.
Okay, so you recommend, if you can, report it, aggressive drivers to either NHP or to Metro?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, so Sheriff, what do you do if you see another driver in their car with a firearm? What's the best thing to do in that case?
It's the same story, especially with a firearm. Absolutely do not want you to engage that individual, because it's not that important as far as I'm concerned, as far if it's a traffic issue or not. But if they have a firearm, report that 911, absolutely. On one end, if it's just a road rage, you're like, I don't have time, I just want to get to work. On the other end, person's possession of a firearm, absolutely do us a favor, do the rest of the community a favor, and call it in.
Wow, scary video. Now you can watch the full interview with the sheriff and all of the weekly interviews with him on 8newsnow.com. Well, a Catholic Mass will honor migrants who have died on the way to their destinations. The border Mass is set to take place on the Rio Grande in downtown El Paso, and it will also take place on the Day of the Dead. You'll find that story right now at borderreport.com. You can read about the number of migrants who have died this year alone and what organizers hope those who attend the Mass get out of it. In What to Watch next week, another visit from a presidential candidate. We're seeing him all the time. Fresh off a strong debate performance, South Bend Mayor Pete Buttigieg will be campaigning in Las Vegas on Tuesday night. He has a campaign event scheduled for 4:30 before headlining a Battle-Born Progress event recognizing local progress leaders. That event starts at 6 o'clock. And next Thursday, there's a domestic violence panel featuring Liz Orton Berger. You saw her earlier in the program. Metro detectives and others in the community will also participate. It'll take place at Las Vegas City Hall, where a candlelight vigil will also be held to honor victims of domestic violence. And we should also mention Mayor Pete is planning to visit some marijuana dispensaries while he's here as well, to take a look at how Nevada is handling the marijuana issue. Well, that's our show. Thanks very much for watching Politics Now. If you have questions about politics, whether local, state, or national, or suggestions for something you'd like to see on the show, please email me, sSebelius@8newsnow.com. We'll do our best to answer your questions. You can stay up to date online. Watch us right here every Saturday. But right now, stay tuned for your local news with Sasha Loftus.